Good evening. My name is Bongiwe Zwane. We go straight to this conversation now at this hour. The South African Post Office former Chief Executive Mark Barnes, of course, posted that tweet on Thursday, and he attributed, of course, his departure, you'd remember, over a year and a half ago to some of the differences in opinion to his strategy. And of course, he was talking about how this would have been his final day in office, but certainly when he left the reins, it didn't look like that turnaround strategy had been implemented. In fact, if I can read that tweet for you, he said, "My contract as CEO of SAPO should only have ended today. If government had let management get on with our board-approved portfolio committee-supported strategy, we would have completed the turnaround of SAPO by now." Imagine that. And that's what, of course, he had posted on social media, which got a lot of people talking. He joins us now to explain, of course, this particular position. Mr. Barnes, good evening, and thank you so much for your time tonight. I just want us to begin with something slightly different. 2 days ago, we saw the resignation of the Chief Financial Officer. News of a chief financial officer at the post office, and this, of course, was effective as at December. And the unions reacted with skepticism, saying they don't believe news that he is going to, he's resigning because of personal reasons. They suspect that there's something going on here. What do you react? What is your reaction to that? And are you surprised that he only lasted on the job 3 months?
Well, Gary, thanks for your interest. It's difficult for me to comment on what's happening inside SAPO now. I'm just not there. And it would probably be a bit unfair for me to even express an opinion on it. I can just talk about where I am and what happened on Friday, and I'm happy to get into that.
And I'd like for you to tell us exactly what happened on Friday, because a lot of people woke up to that tweet, and I mean, there was a lot of talk, and it still is, setting a lot of people talking. What happened there?
Yeah, to be fair, I didn't think it would get these many legs. I started work at the post office on the 15th of January 2016, which was 5 years ago. And, I just woke up and reflected. I had to reflect on, unfinished business. And I was on a trip coming home on Friday from the Cape, where I'd been on holiday, and you drive through each of these towns. And in the middle of the town, in the best place in the town, is this commercially irreplaceable infrastructure called the post office. And, I realized I fell in love with that place and with the people that work there. And driving through these towns, half of them falling to pieces, and seeing these scraggy queues of people waiting to get paid their grants out of the post office, the only inclination I had was to get out of my car and go and help them, and go and refeel the culture changes that we brought about in the post office. But we needed all of the ingredients for that thing to complete its turnaround strategy. And those ingredients were, by the shareholder, finally not made available to us. And so we couldn't do it.
And was it an easy decision for you in 2019 to then decide to say, you know what, unfortunately, I have to let this go now?
Presented with the irrefutable facts, it became an easy decision. I mean, there is no post office in the world that has succeeded in the new age without access to the national payment system, without financial transactions, without its peoples using the localities, the commercially irreplaceable footprint that post offices have around the world. And so it's no longer about post. It's about having a government infrastructure, a series of channels, if you like, two-way channels, which have huge relevance in the modern world. So when it was decided by the shareholder that the bank should be held separately, I could no longer promise the delivery of a fully integrated, functional, and financially sustainable post office, because without access to the national payment system, we couldn't pay social grants efficiently. We couldn't allow people to open bank accounts. We couldn't start performing the role that we might have assumed in state bank. We couldn't. I mean, essentially, the post office is a huge repository of data. We had something like 6 million depositors, 17, 18 million beneficiaries, 11.8 million addresses. We were obliged to keep everyone's details and what was delivered there and what was posted from there. We are an extraordinarily valuable and virtuous set of data. But we're in 2020, man. You know, you had to have that technology. You had to have a modern bank which permitted cash flows and online settlement of transactions and all of these kinds of things. And Post was just what started, but it wasn't where we were going to end. It was e-commerce. It was all of those kinds of things. And once the shareholder acted entirely within their rights. If they choose to operate the bank separately without the post office, that's their prerogative. But it is not a ship I was prepared to captain, because I'm telling you, it was going to fail. I still believe it's going to fail.
And Mark, there's been lots of reports around, what some have called interference, and even some of these squabbles playing out in the public domain. And this is, of course, interference from the shareholder. These are allegations that have been made time and time again. Did you find this to be during your time?
Not as dramatically as the press would like it to happen. I had a very strong board under the guidance of the now late chair, who was a very strong and comforting human being. And for the most part, we were left alone until such time as I think our ambitions got broader than perhaps what the mandate was. And let me characterize it like this. If you own the hospital, it doesn't entitle you to come into the operating theater where an expert cardiologist is at work. Okay, because it's a partnership between those who own the assets and who own the shares and those who manage the mandate. Now, perhaps, we were all at fault in the sense that we didn't spend enough time agreeing the mandate, agreeing the scope. I mean, we started off by wanting to take over social grants because we saw that as a service, not a profit entity. We saw all of that money belonging in the state. We saw social grant recipients as beneficiaries of the state, not some, economic unit to be taken advantage of by others. But that was only the first of what we had planned. We saw ourselves as an integrated computer offering almost anything, chronic medicine, access to passports, whatever you like, anything between the state and its far-flung, dispersed individuals, we felt should go through the post office. And so, when you reach a fundamental disagreement about that, it's probably because you didn't all do your homework in the beginning and agree the mandate. Because my view would be this, and I'm afraid this has happened across many SOEs, is that, you need to agree a mandate. You need to agree the size of the box in which the CEO must operate. And once you've agreed that, if the CEO is staying within that mandate and that box is heading to where it was promised it would go, for goodness sake, leave it alone. And that doesn't seem to happen. And it's unfortunate, because what we need in our country is not a division between the owners of, or the practices of power and the economic forces. We need partnership. We need for us to hold hands and to recognize the disparate, for whatever historical reasons. We need to recognize that there are skill sets which need to be validly transferred within a cohesive unit. We need to recognize that people have to stand up, that culture has to change. I mean, when we left there, the people in the post office were starting to put their uniform back on again, and starting to identify, and we didn't buy them. We didn't give increases every year. What we did is that we brought into focus the prospect of economic dignity, utilizing an unutilized state asset. When the elements necessary for that to happen were taken away, I couldn't stay in charge.
And fast forward, we're still seeing reports that, are talking about this organization in trouble. And of course, when you look at what, the post office is really presenting to Parliament, losses after losses after losses each year. And I mean, it looks like it's choking, and some have placed the blame at the doorstep of management, while others have said that there are some serious financial issues there, because it's really running at a loss and might have to, be on its knees at some point.
Listen, we are all responsible for our past. Management, the shareholders, the providers of capital, the client. We can't walk away and divide and cross-accuse one another about it. I was there. I was responsible. So were the shareholders, so were the ministers, so were the providers of capital. We were there, and we own that past. It was about the future that we disagreed. Now, There can be no doubt that the post office, in its old-fashioned definition of, sending a letter to Umtata, makes no commercial sense. But that was dealt with in the sense that we had a public service mandate, which is funded by the government, and that's a service. Okay. What we needed to build onto this bought and paid for commercially irreplaceable infrastructure was a whole bunch of other services to think about ourselves in a new world. So who was responsible? We were all responsible, man. If we'd had it in us to reach agreement, if we'd had it in us to persuade one another, and if we'd had it in us to listen to one another's points of view more, that intersection might have found more fertile ground. So I regret that we didn't do that. I'm sorry that I had to go, but I did have to go. And when I left, we had peace with the unions, we had peace with the board, and I think we had, if anything, encouragement from the portfolio committee, and we had no corruption in the post office. And so why would you mess with that? Why would you change that course? I was never presented with an alternative strategy to suggest that should replace what we had formulated together. It wasn't me. We had an executive team, we had a fully fledged board, and we had the department and the government and the shareholder coming together to formulate this thing. Taking over the social grants was a victory for the state, a victory over private sector who sought to extract economics from our people. It was a victory for the fiscus, a victory for the state, for all of us. And it should have served as a model for more, not a reason to do less. And so, that's how I felt about it. And I miss it, to be honest. It's not where I thought I'd ever go. I never thought I'd cross the road and find myself amongst people who I went to teach, who ended up teaching me about life, about, what it is to operate in these kinds of circumstances. And it's wrong. It's a travesty that partnership that we formed between us wasn't allowed to flourish and endure the differences between us, and to create some case study of how prosperity can emerge from private sector expertise, government entrenched rights and power and capabilities, and a common purpose to create more with less. And that's what I tweeted. That's what I was sad about. And anyway, and so be it. And I don't wish for the post office's demise. On the contrary, I would be available in any way to make sure that it didn't, fail.
Mm. And some have said that, as a response to your tweet, that it might be too little too late. It might be some sour grapes because you were also there as part of the system, and still things appeared to have then, still crumbled because things are still not working. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I take my share of the responsibility for the things that we didn't do fast enough. But you know what, converting strategy that with long-term economics into realized cash flows doesn't take 6 months. It's in the last 5 years of a turnaround strategy that you harvest. The first few years are about planting, about exercising things that don't belong there, about changing the mix. The harvesting, the sweet grapes only come after that toil, in the sand. And so it's that period of time, that year and 4 months, when we might have seen a harvest emerge. And it wasn't guaranteed. I didn't solve the world, but I can tell you this for free. I wasn't alone, and we were all in this together. And today, when I walk into any branch of the post office, I am warmly embraced, and we found a partnership between all of the differences between us, and we held hands. And I miss that a lot.
As we wrap up our discussion, there's another tweet that some have interpreted as you continuing to, reflect. You have posted a picture of a fish.
No, they weren't related. They're not related. I can see, I thought about how they could tag each other. I was on the beach and I saw that horrible picture of this dead fish's head, and I thought it would be a nice tweet. They're not related.
So it's not an analogy of something.
No, it is not. Okay.
All right. Mr. Barnes, as just a final question in 30 seconds from me tonight, some people are even opting to go for, private postal services versus choosing the post office. Where do you see the post office going right now, and how can things be remedied? Because it looks like drastic measures are needed to turn things around.
We've got to define where we want to play. the government has specific, we have specific rights as the post office. It's a government organization. We are allowed to clear customs. We are allowed to have goods deposited directly into us at the airports. We have a monopoly over the 0 to 1 kilogram. We have to pay your fines to us. There's a whole litany of things to which the post office is entitled and should be, because they should be overseen by government, that compensate us for those things which are less commercial, like delivering 4 letters to Tata in a truck, okay? There was an equation of equilibrium that worked, okay? If you take pieces out of any financial equation that is in balance, it falls over. And so, I don't know if it's going to work. I suspect that, we still have to wrap our common arms around SASSA. I think we have to expand the uses that can happen at every counter in the post. Why can't we give people COVID vaccines over the counter at the post office? Why can't we do anything in any counter that requires an interaction between government and the peoples in those remote areas which otherwise don't have access to these centralized, sophisticated, technology-based services? Why would we not use the competitive infrastructure that we own? The branch network of the post office, if it works out correctly, will be the only surviving physical infrastructure in every town. That's a hugely valuable asset.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Barnes. We certainly do appreciate it. That's former CEO of the South African Post Office, Mark Barnes, rather. And just ahead, we tried to make meaning of democracy, the opposition, and indeed the prosperity of the people of Uganda after the claimed victory of longtime President Yoweri Museveni and the defeat of youthful agitator Bobi Wine.